Indeed, I'd like to welcome everyone to the KB Memorial Lecture, indeed celebrating a distinguished gentleman who distinguished himself in several areas. I'd now like to call on Sir Asante to give us the welcome address and also introduce the chairman for this occasion. Sir, if you're here, you're ready for a round of applause for Mr. Sir Asante.
Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to recognize, we have in our midst His Excellency President John Ajiko Kufuor, the former President of the Republic of Ghana. You're welcome, sir. You're very we also have in our midst, I'm taking part of the MC's work, but we also have in our midst Professor Justice Tatuba, who gave the first lecture in this series. Prof, you're welcome. We have Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, Second Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, who is here joining us as a panelist. And Doc, you're welcome. We also have Dr. Nisoa. Dr. Nisoa was a former Director General of the SEC, and he's a distinguished economist. He's joining us to give the opening remarks for this occasion. Doc, you're welcome. We also have Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour, who is a Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics, University of Ghana, and she's joining us as a panelist as well. Thank you very much. And I can't mention all the names. We will introduce, I won't mention the speaker, Ivor, he will be introduced properly. But we want to welcome all of you for joining us this afternoon to commemorate and remember the legacy, the enduring legacy of Kojo Bentsi-Enchill. We at Bentsi-Enchill Lecture are very proud of this day. It gives us an opportunity every day to remember Kojo and what he has done and what he stands for. And we believe today's lecture resonates with his research interests, the things that he was interested in, matters of historical perspectives of our country and its impact on our current state. When we chose this year's topic, many people I've spoken to have asked me, why are lawyers interested in monetary policy? My answer has been, why not? I think that we are interested because it is important for us to understand where we have come from as a nation, why monetary policy is important, and why having good monetary policy is important for our development and where we are going. I think I had a conversation with someone who said, well, we could have focused on the narrow legal issues about the independence of monetary policy, but we wanted to go bigger. And we have chosen a distinguished speaker to do that for us today. We are very grateful that you've all joined us, and it promises to be a stimulating lecture, and I'm sure that you will all enjoy it and will take something away from today's lecture. Thank you very much for joining us. I also have the distinguished pleasure and honor to introduce the chairman for this occasion. The chairman for this occasion is part of our family. He is now the godfather of the firm. He is our only founding partner that we can call on occasions like this. He has trained all of us. I sat in his team as a pupil many years ago, and he continues to be a guiding light for us at every time that we need him. Mr. Divine Lecture, we call him ZKG. He is the chairman of the occasion. We are very happy to have him. We are happy that he has agreed to join us. His leadership and calming spirit always gives us comfort in every occasion that we have had to rely on him. Mr. Lecture, thank you very much for agreeing to do this for us. Please. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Seth, for those warm words and your invitation to chair this function. The presence here of so many of you is a large testimony to the respect we have for the memory of our departed colleague, friend, mentor, and all the roles that you fulfilled in our lives, both professional and otherwise. A year passes very quickly, extremely quickly. I remember last year we welcomed Nigel Boardman, a distinguished lawyer and solicitor from the UK, who shared his thoughts with us on Africa's natural resources and what governments and investors should do to make a success out of it. The previous year, we had an equally distinguished gentleman, Professor Justice Dateba, who also shared his thoughts with us on certain essential aspects of the new Ghana Company Act. And he set a brilliant tone for the lectures that follow. Today, we will listen to a lecture on Ghana's monetary policy. As Seth said, it shows the diversity of interests that our departed colleague had in research and also in the various aspects of life. I do not pretend to understand monetary policy. I do not know the full characteristics of that animal called monetary policy. But I can see that it terrorizes us from our homes, from our workplaces, from the market, and wherever you may be. Perhaps we live here with a better understanding of what monetary policy is. When the Monetary Policy Committee meets quarterly, Ghanaians are apprehensive. Will the dollar rate change? Will interest go up? Will inflation come down? Will the take-home pay actually take you home? These are questions that we ask ourselves. And the fact that they have not been satisfactorily answered over the years tells me there is a problem. Maybe today we'll know the problem. So I expect that we'll be better educated, better informed than we came in here, and as we leave, we should take the message out and the takeaways. I'll call on all of us to listen with rapt attention so that we can formulate the questions and do justice to the question and answer session that will follow. And I would also plead with you to cooperate with the chair so that we can have a successful function. With that, I accept the honor to chair this function.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can do better than that. To show appreciation indeed to Mr. Divine Lecture. Interesting thoughts there, and even as today, there are still arguments about whether we should use per capita income to measure the growth of the economy, or let's switch to happiness index. I know it will still go on how the macro numbers transcend down to the ordinary people out there. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite a rep of the family to give us a speech, Kojo Bentsi-Enchill of Stanbic Bank, if you're here. Let's welcome him, please.
Good afternoon. Just checking that I can be heard well. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly permit me to stand on already established protocols as I bring you this goodwill message on behalf of Kojo Bentsi-Enchill's family. My name is Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, and I'm a first cousin to Kojo Bentsi-Enchill. In essence, Kojo's father and my father were brothers. Although Kojo and I technically were cousins, he was 25 years my senior, and so our relationship was akin to an uncle-nephew dynamic. And indeed, Kojo did play that supportive, dependable, wise counselor and guardian role as an uncle in my life. I'm immensely honored, therefore, to welcome you to the third KBE Memorial Lecture in memory of Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, whose impact on the legal profession and its practice in Ghana continues to inspire many of us and also influence other fields of endeavor, including economics, banking, and finance. This lecture series was established to celebrate Kojo's life and legacy, as well as perpetuate his values and ideals by providing a platform for distinguished speakers to share their privileged insights and informed perspectives on topical issues. In this regard, we anticipate that today's lecture on the evolution of monetary policy in Ghana and its impact on economic development will take us on a journey through the history of monetary policy in Ghana, from the early days of colonial rule to the present day, highlighting how our country has navigated various economic challenges and development opportunities. Looking also at the august panel of speakers assembled to discuss the subject matter, today's gathering promises to be a thought-provoking and enlightening experience, befitting the very standards of excellence that Kojo espoused in his professional career. Kojo was not only an exceptional lawyer, but also a visionary leader, inspiring mentor, and a loving family man, amongst other stellar qualities he had. To me personally, he played the mentor role and was one person I would always defer to for advice on any life-critical or career-defining decision. Simply put, he was, to me, this fountain of knowledge and practical wisdom, bubbling with fresh insights on a diverse range of topics, from finance to classical music, tennis, his favorite sport, to politics. And on other less serious occasions, when we got together for some fun, we would spend hours playing chess and Monopoly, through which I also got to experience Kojo's humorous but also fiercely competitive nature. Kojo was revered globally by members of the legal profession, and up to this day is still highly spoken of in all these circles. I remember with particular fondness an experience I once had as a young banker in the early years of my career, working in the City of London. I had turned up for a meeting with my boss and other senior bankers at the corporate offices of a prestigious Magic Circle law firm, Slaughter & May. We sat around the table and started off the meeting with team introductions. It eventually got to my turn, being the most junior member of the team. And as I mentioned my name, the managing partner of Slaughter & May literally paused the meeting to ask, "Are you related to Kojo Bentsi-Enchill?" And when I responded in the affirmative, this gentleman spent the next 5 minutes, what must have seemed like an eternity, eulogizing the intellectual brilliance, academic prowess, and professional achievements of Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, whom he knew from his Cambridge days and also partnered with on some complex legal cases and transactions. Needless to say, my senior colleagues saw me in a very different light from that day onwards. Suddenly, they began to take me more seriously in the office. Simply because I was related to a Kojo Bentsi-Enchill they had never met, but who by all credible accounts was legendary. A good name, as they say, is better, far better than riches. Kojo's legacy lives on in the work of Bella, in the lives he touched, and in the lawyers he trained and inspired. His memory reminds us of the importance of integrity, excellence, and superior client service. May his life and legacy inspire us all to be better lawyers, better professionals, better leaders, I dare say better bankers, and better citizens of the Republic of Ghana. We are also exceptionally grateful to Bella, this is from the family, for your efforts to institutionalize these lectures in memory of Kojo Bentsi-Enchill. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause. A man whose name will still live on and indeed continue to open more doors for those who work with him and those who are connected to him. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I line up to call upon the Country Director for the International Growth Center Ghana, former Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dr. Ni Soa. If you hear a round of applause, let's welcome Dr. Soa to give his opening remarks.
Good afternoon. KB was my contemporary at Legon. So when I was asked to participate in this, I gladly accepted. Then I went back and looked at the topic again, monetary policy and economic development. And I asked myself whether this is not a trap. Because I've been associated with monetary policy in Ghana for a very long time. I've taught monetary policy at Legon for a long time. Then when the monetary policy committee was set up, I was part of the first crop of members. And virtually everybody who started with me left me there because I was there for about 12 years. And at the Monetary Policy Committee also, I realized that about 90% of the technical staff were my students. So if now you are being asked to talk about what you did and its impact on economic development, is it a trap? More so, they started by saying that I should make the opening remark. Very typical of lawyers. They are trying to ask me to make a plea. I plead not guilty. The topic is very interesting. And Ivor will be talking more from the historical point of view. And so what I decided to do in my brief opening remarks is to do what in economics we will call the history of economic thought of the controversy. Because it is a controversy in economics, a very major controversy at that. Economics started by those we now refer to as the classicals. And for the classicals, what they think of money is that money does not have any effect on the real sector of the economy. And we therefore talk about money within the classical context as being neutral. In other words, whatever you do to the money supply should not impact on the real side of the economy. In the economic jargon, we usually refer to it as the classical dichotomy. With the classical dichotomy, money is neutral. That is therefore the idea that a lot of economics were trained in. It was when there was a World Depression that a young economist at Cambridge brought an idea that broke that controversy. He's called John Maynard Keynes. So Keynes said that kind of controversy will hold only if we assume that prices are flexible both upwards and downwards. So what he used to break that controversy was the fact that he said, yes, prices are flexible when you are thinking of prices rising. But when you ask prices to come down, they are sticky downwards. That concept alone helped to break that classical dichotomy. So we have a new area in economics which was born, which was the Keynesian economics. And it went on very well. Everybody doing macroeconomics now tried to do it more in Keynes way. And actually, in practicing Keynesian economics, therefore, it helped a lot of countries to get out of trouble. That is how most economies actually beat the Depression, not only the Depression, but part of the financing after the World War II was using the ideas of Keynesian economics. So that dichotomy which was brought about by the classicals was broken. The US in particular benefited from it. And the monetary policy was used as an effective tool in advancing development in the Americas. That was early, up to about the 70s. But I think the classicals did not go to sleep. They were doing their work because they came back with something they call neoclassicals, because they had a rethinking that, all these things that you are talking about is based on expectations also. If you allow the fact that you think of price expectations only by thinking of the past, which we call adaptive expectations, then maybe you Keynesians are right. But when you try to formulate your expectations in the sense that you are taking together all information that is available to you as an economic agent and using it to make your decision, then maybe what the classicals said initially may still hold. Because they introduced this concept now we call rational expectation. Not adaptive expectation, but rational expectation. Taking all information that is available before you make a decision. And that then became what we call the neoclassical form of this thing. Where they met the case was then for that. Yes, in the short run, monetary policy then can have effect on the real side of the economy. But in the long run, monetary policy will not have effect on the real side of the economy. That is right. So right now, the schools of thought are still divided on this. The Keynesians hold on to their view, the neoclassicals hold on there. There's a third class, which now is not very much considered. They are called the monetarists. Those who believe very much that inflation is everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Friedman and co. So where are we now with this in terms of Ghana? In terms of Ghana, since the Monetary Policy Committee, by the way, before the Monetary Policy Committee was instituted, our practice of monetary policy in Ghana was more or less like the classical. We're using the money stock a lot to control things. The Monetary Policy Committee is different now. When they meet, they look at every aspect of the economy, every aspect, from the real side to external side to monetary side, everywhere. And they gather all this information. Because one principle behind the Monetary Policy Committee is that provide the economic agent with all the necessary information he needs in order to make a good decision. That is why you have the press conference after every Monetary Policy Committee. And data now is shared freely on the economy by the central bank. So that is the new mode of monetary policy making. I won't go too much into detail on that because I'm sure Ivor will touch on it, and I see the deputy governor over here also. I'm sure he will also go into it. But I think the style of monetary policy is changed, and whatever the monetary policy does, it has effect on this thing. A footnote: when we are also talking about monetary policy and its impact on economic development, we should note that economic development now has changed. The concept of economic development has changed. It is no more just an increase in output that we call economic development. Now people think about areas like literacy, health, voice, and other things are all part of economic development. I think it would be naive for us to think that monetary policy will be said that it has no impact at all on any of these areas. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Dr. Sowa. Indeed, he has set the ground for us to appreciate our lecture this afternoon, different theories of economy, and even I'll say Economics 101. Thank you so much, Dr. Sowa. Indeed, a round of applause for him. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready for a memorial lecture, and our speaker is Mr. Ivor Agyeman-Duah. Just a little bit of history about him, or information about him. He's a historian, development specialist, a former diplomat, and extensive experience in economic development across Africa. He has worked as an advisor in several African countries on pivotal economic development projects. He served also as a special advisor to our former president, John Ajay Kufuor, who is here. Round of applause for him. Thank you so much, Mr. President. For 8 years on international development issues, working at the World Food Programme on projects across the world, including Ethiopia and Kenya as well. Prior to that, he was also a diplomat and the minister counselor at the Ghana Embassy in Washington, D.C., and also worked at the Commission in London, working among others. There, he also worked with the World Bank Institute, Networking Group on Africa Diaspora and Economic Growth, on UN engagements in the New York and the Commonwealth. A historian of Bank of Ghana, he is also a visiting scholar at the British Museum, whilst working on several issues around the world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, he's our speaker for this afternoon's lecture. Let's welcome Mr. Ivor Agyeman-Duah. A round of applause for him.
Good afternoon, dear invited guests and friends, and to you, Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, for your introduction, which hopefully will match the audience's expectation to such a lecture. In the main and in particular, my gratitude goes to this well-placed law firm, its co-founders and partners, for the honor of asking me to speak on professional virtues and in memory of one of them who is no more with us. I took the liberty, as I told the managing partner, Seta Santi, to chip on an old blog of the main team, The Evolution of Monetary Policy in Ghana and its impact on economic development. And so I will speak to you on a historical approach to this. I ended it up with the topic, Monetary Cultures and the Muses of New Economic Growth. Of the intellectual monuments of the world, King's College of the University of Cambridge could count among its crown jewels. Its intricate architecture is over 600 years old, and in the words of one of its alumni, the Indian novelist Salman Rushdie, it is the best in the United Kingdom. Significantly, as an atheist, he also finds the college's choir as the best in the world.
To a multitude of social scientists, it is the eternal college of the great 19th century economist, John Maynard Keynes, who sat at the feet of Alfred Marshall and will help shape modern economics. Keynes was the first who led the negotiation on the side of Britain that eventually gave birth to the International Monetary Fund. This was after the Second World War. That invaluable contribution informed the editorial decision to use his caricature on the cover of the organization's 75th anniversary magazine. To the large apostolic group that Keynes created will be produced generations of individuals and international believers known as Keynesian economists who abided in his applied theories and interpretations, which for over 60 years shaped global thinking. Some were Salvation academics and central bankers who thought they had answers on what to do and how to save the world when challenges came. The master's eternal belief could be encapsulated in his everlasting epitaph. There should be extra government spending during times of poor economic growth and high unemployment. As ideas, and in particular, economic theories, survive in time and social conditions, many thought Keynes was fading until the 2007 financial crisis, when he was resurrected. The leadership of that crisis in Western Europe were all Keynesians. They included Chancellor of the Exchequer and later Prime Minister Gordon Brown, his successor as Chancellor, the late Darling, and the Governor of the Bank of England, Melvin King. The former chair of the United States Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, is a huge fan of Keynes and the monetary economists and philosophers of the Scottish Enlightenment. Together, and with a Keynesian belief in the state's role in economic balance, they pulled the master into the resolution of macroeconomic disruptions that affected all countries, including Ghana, which had been classified as a lower middle income economy in 2007, and as such was not eligible for donor budget support. Last year, I was at the city of Cambridge and saw congregations of fee-paying tourists at King's College to see its architecture. For many, however, it was about Keynes and his college shrine. The roofing was being renovated to allow for solar penetration, and to the BBC and the other film crews, it was a good enough story. Keynes was not the only economist who lived in his day. 400 years earlier, what will become the classical school in economics emerged in the 1600s. From the French economist and Minister of Finance, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, through Karl Marx up to Alfred Marshall. Economics has always been dictated by social changes and the leadership ideas that confronted them. If we saw this in the legacy of Keynes, it was such moments that centuries earlier produced the first US Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, whose monetary management changed much of the US and the world. Before him, there had been other greats. It was in the same fashion that Napoleon, before his Waterloo, established the Bank of France to manage monetary concerns of the wartime economy with its heavy military attendant and expenditures. Dramatic moments continued to shape the history of ideas and led to new global creations, not least in the recent consequences of COVID-19 pandemic and what has become known as the new normal. It was these evolutions of thoughts and social confrontations that brought a universal heritage to us through the colonial system, international education, and the worlds and people we never knew, but who came to influence the ways in which we do things in the so-called modern society. It was the same with the eminent lawyer, Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, who used his good education from Legon and Cambridge in the promotion of economic growth and cultures, the development of law practice, industrial mining, energy economics, and their complements of finance and the banking architecture. They uniquely covered both the old and new economics of Ghana. It was not just coverage, but an individual's and a firm's impactful alignment. Like Keynes, I understand he debated well, and his mark of patriotism was like that of the masters. It should be said, however, that Bentsi-Enchill's lineage goes back to what I call the Fanti Enlightenment, or intellectual history of the late 1800s Gold Coast. Successful academics, eminent legal scholars, and tactful merchants. The Fanti Enlightenment produced great men of letters, from John Mensah Saba, J.W. de Graaf Johnson, J.E. Kisley Hayford, and Atua Homan, who, among others, shaped the intellect of colonial Ghana. These elders were inspired by native wisdom and conveyed to us what happened in centuries of economic and socio-religious structures. They wrote on an institutional framework and saw their daily operations in the courts of Akan kings. Structures of these courts, such as the Sana Division and the Treasury Departments, were in charge of the recurrent and capital expenditures and taxation systems. And of course, these traditional leaders utilized the natural resources of the gold fields and the mining of silver and brass. The legislations that permitted their exploitations had been made through carefully crafted indigenous customs and traditions. We know of the Sahelian trade caravan of soft commodities from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, of the manufacturing and constructed routes from Kano and Maiduguri in northern Nigeria, through to northern Ghana, that also involved the Sahelian Hausa migrant traders, kola nuts, leather, and dried onions. They who are now in their millions are settlers and citizens in West Africa, especially Ghana, Cameroon, and Nigeria. The growth and maturity of the traditional leadership and kingdoms in the 19th century saw numerous currencies in circulation with central monetary systems, even if they were not called banks yet. This trade involved, especially in the 19th century, not only the exchange of commodities, but also numerous currency trading. The Asantini Osebons made use of the seeds or gold weights from the 1810s to weigh gold dust as currency, especially with the Moorish Muslim traders from North Africa. There were millions of gold weights in circulation, reflecting the extent of the regional or Sahelian trade. Today, we see these weights as art, but they were for market transactions to determine the fineness or purity in the gold monetary system in the West African and the Middle Eastern trade. As the historian Kwesi Konedu says, they were standard weights for negotiations because price hinged on supply, demand, type of goods, and the value of corresponding currencies. The weights are reminders of today's foreign exchange and money transfer companies. Years later, the Asantini Kwekudia in the 1850s built 3 major central gold or currency storages: the great chest of the treasury inside his palace, and 2 others in his smaller palaces in the towns of Abrausu and Bremain. According to the British economist Thomas McCaskey, who recently worked on the valuations of the gold reserves with scientists, including chemists and engineers of the Royal Mint in London, the great chest of the treasury alone, with its over 400,000 ounces of gold, in 1867 was worth 1.2 million pounds, and in today's terms, 2 billion pounds. This huge reserve was mismanaged by his unpopular predecessor, Kofi Kakari, to stay in power until his eventual installment. Of his modern types, we will discuss in the later part of this lecture. Along the coast from Keita through Accra and Cape Coast to the western region of what will become Ghana, were other currency instruments, such as the cowries, the most popular convertible currency, which was recognized in the Kingdom of Dahomey, present-day Benin Republic, whose central bank's architecture in Cotonou imitates the cowrie. We know of the famous story of Mansa Musa's production of gold and the inflationary trends he created to balance the monetary circulation in Timbuktu as he engaged in massive educational infrastructures. His uncle, Sundiata the Great, who was also a traditional poet, had predicted that the world would come to know of him and his dynasty for economic and monetary reasons. We forgot of that until the great musical, The Lion King, which took inspiration from him and became an A-star production some 20 years ago. On a visit to Alaba in Kumasi today, one will find descendants of Malians, Burkinabes, Nigerians, who, after many centuries, are still engaged in the business of money changing in all currencies. Some are at Su, airport commercial areas, and Tudu in Accra, and are sometimes in transnational remittance through mutual agencies made easier by the telephone and internet connectivity. The disadvantage to the Ghana Revenue Authority is that they do not pay taxes, notwithstanding the hard work put in by patrons like Kojo Bentsi-Enchill. So, suddenly, there were varying traditional infrastructures and agreements for financial intermediations in pre-colonial Ghana, and with its neighbors, before the colonial administration introduced Kens, the apostles, and many others into our lives. The colonial intervention to these orders were detested. Anti-colonial discontent could do little other than stick within the new inherited universal heritage governance infrastructure. In 1957, when the Bank of Ghana was founded as one of the sovereign institutions, Nkrumah's point was that it should be development-oriented, a development bank and a central bank seeking monetary equilibrium and fighting battles of inflation. He said, "It is essential to our independence that we have a government-owned bank and that the central bank follows a policy designed to secure our economic independence and to further the general development of our country." If there is a genesis to the modern history of monetary cultures, this was it. In 1960, when the population was 5 million, it had a GDP of 2 billion. After 68 years, we have had about 5 stages of mixed economic development, not just in policy, but government systems of civilian and military dictatorships. The first monetary transition and development had to do with the appointment of the first governor of the Bank of Ghana, Eggleston, and his deputy, D.F. Stone, who were Englishmen from the Bank of England. The Minister of Finance at the time, K. Gbedema, was finding it very difficult to get a deputy governor, that's the second one. The reason was that other newly independent countries in South Asia and Africa needed personnel, and Britain could not supply them. The very beginning of Ghana's monetary culture was therefore British in outlook. The British civil servants, including those who remain at the Ministry of Finance, lasted a few years. Monetary culture found expression in some of these. 1. decolonization of the currency, as the photo of Queen Elizabeth II on the CD note changed, though the printing of currency continued in Europe. The establishment of 6 departments, including currency issuance and the training of Ghanaians as technical people on the models of the Bank of England. Advisory services to the public through the JBC on monetary issues, especially on currency day. Implications on cocoa purchases by the government-controlled Cocoa Marketing Board as in the colonial times. Accumulation of foreign exchange from exports of gold and cocoa, and the last, that is the 6th one, investments and assets in the name of Ghana lodged in England with the crown agents. Ideology was a victim. The Africanization of the civil service by Nkrumah generated confusion and will be one of the reasons that led to the resignation of Eglinton and Stone. Nkrumah was wary of British neo-colonial influence in monetary affairs, even if he could do very little about it. His discovery that over 10 million pounds sterling of Ghana's reserves in the United Kingdom had been poorly managed and depreciated did not help matters between the government, the Bank of England, and the Commonwealth Relations Office. It was irrelevant to him that other former colonies suffered the same fate aside Ghana's. In 1960, he appointed the German central banker and professor of economics, Herbert Kesselys, as the second governor of the Bank of Ghana. This was to dilute the British influence, which was disturbing him really a lot. And it was for the same reason that he brought on board the Karl Marx professor of economics, Joseph Bagua, from Budapest as an advisor. Later on, he appointed the CPP regional chair of Greater Accra with little qualification as the first Ghanaian governor. When the CPP was overthrown, or the government for that matter, in 1966, the monetary culture had been deeply influenced by the Africanization policy and the state-controlled economy, which led to conflicts between the outgoing expatriates and Ghanaian politicians. The second monetary culture was after 1966. This was a period of technocrats of high standing with the right academic and professional qualifications. Some had been persuaded to return to Ghana by the great economist J.H. Mensah, who had been part of Nkrumah's development plan and later became the Minister of Finance of Buzia's government. That period saw the governorships of Albert Admako, Nkrumah's last governor, J.H. Frimpong Ansah, Alas Ashiago, John Ado, Amonikwe, and J.K. Agama, who collectively had to endure low government export receipts, battles with mounting debts and repayments, interest rate matters, and other economic development challenges alongside some progress. Law and money go together, and so monetary culture, from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, have been framed in law and acts of Parliament. Central banks have strong legal divisions as the institution of monetary policy committees, cooperation and multilateral financial institutions, the operations of local commercial or universal banks, and non-banking institutions have all legal instruments around them, as well as constitutional provisions in some cases. However, when constitutions were suspended and replaced with decrees, governing instruments of monetary practice were also affected. If the 1970s weakened the monetary system, the 1980s had no option either than to conform to the higher discipline as the country had to go to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for its economic recovery program of 1983. These are fundamental things that managers do. However, politicians come with collective manifestos containing both what they can do and what is impossible to do in one bag. This could lead to fiscal dominance, as governors of central banks are appointed. Fiscal councils could be established to balance monetary situations, as had been done in Kenya and Ghana. But it again has to do with commitment, especially when there is a tilt in monetary interest rates that check executive overbearingness. Apart from such influences, the personality of past governors had defined the cultures we have. When Amonikwe was governor, he was very much against using reserves of foreign revenue to import commodities, including staple food. Because of this, he decided to establish farms, including poultry and cattle ranches and cottage industries across the country for the production of comparative advantageous products, including materials for real estate. Unfortunately, these industries and agribusinesses were run like state enterprises, which indeed they were. Nikwe's ideas fell through in the main, and later, some of the industrial assets were sold. When Paul Akpa became governor in 2008 under President Kufuor, he thought that the core responsibilities of monetary economics was not about the development infrastructure, and the loss of such assets would be disposed of. He also thought the staff number of over 2,000 was too high and non-essential to the growth agenda of the economy, and so he sought to trim it down. The Bank of Ghana Act 2002, Act 612, which was enacted after 45 years, was further strengthened with Act 673 in 2004 under, again, President Kufuor, which gave it the needed operational independence. Akpa brought some technical people and economists from the IMF, including Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari. I think we know who he is, who will later become the first deputy governor of the Bank of Ghana. A decade later, and due to external factors, not least the 2007 financial crisis and COVID-19 pandemic, new developments and offices were created, including the FinTech and Innovation Office at the Bank of Ghana. The staff numbers will go up, but not necessarily for needed or demanded services, but due in part, and some of it, to political pressure to recruit people with connections from both sides of the divide. Under Addison, we have seen the Bank of Ghana's constitutional mandate and the operational act publicly displayed as a defense weapon. The bank, for instance, ignored initial calls from the Ministry of Finance and stuck to the non-financing of government expenditures, but was forced under pressure to review this during the COVID-19 situation with its security implications, and therefore it had to trigger the emergency powers of the bank. In any case, this same bank was the first to warn Ghanaians and the public in particular of the financial dangers before it came forcefully between 2023 and 2024. While these are recent occurrences known to us all, it was again the strength the bank gathered to defend itself in that period that was interesting. For the first time, there was huge public disagreement about its relationship with the government, some of which also took political turns. In March 2024, economist and former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Ernest Aidi, said that the growth of positive monetary culture of the bank has made it one of the best public institutions in the last 30 years. It had come from a very weak culture, he said, of the 1980s, when it was impossible to get decent data to do research with. There was low intellectual capacity, he explained, and that it was with time that the bank got to where it is today. I can bet that the ranking member of the Finance Committee, Isaac Adongo, will have different things to say. Whilst it is easy to criticize military interventions in our politics, it is ironic that it was under Jerry John Rawlins's structural adjustment program that some vital monetary facilities and institutions were established. The Bank of Ghana had to contend with an autocratic executive board chairman and a powerless governor, all right. But in the end, when the right legislation was implemented, it was through SAP that attempts were made to cap operations of the underground economy, or the black market, the ancient markets to some of us. The resilience of these markets was such that their liberal exchange rate patronage competed with the foreign bureaus since the latter were established in the 1980s, even as they both depended on the Bank of Ghana exchange rate. The universal banks have had to sometimes, this is a bit uncomfortable, collaborate with these huge underground markets whose capacity and surveillance system against the central bank's operation had been always elusive. It was the liberalization of the markets from the 1980s, the introduction of technology as part of the finance and technology revolution, the financial sector reform concept of the 1990s that was handled from 1994 by former governor of the bank, Ashiago, that contributed to further growth structure. These interventions facilitated transnational remittances from the estimated 3 million Ghanaians outside the country, who at one time brought in over 30% of our foreign revenue into the treasury, though not for the government. It was the same FinCEP and other technological evolutions that led us to the telecommunications development and the mobile money financial services, especially for small and medium-scale enterprises. The Securities and Exchange Commission was established by the Securities Industry Act 2016 Act 929 to regulate and promote the growth and development of an efficient, fair, and transparent security market in which investors and the integrity of the markets are protected. It was also for regulation and legislation that had ensured the viability of monetary cultures. What these facilities, the Bank of Ghana, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the universal banks, the Ghana Stock Exchange, and others do, does not alone constitute monetary cultures. The attitude of corporate organizations and individuals to what become at the end non-performing loans had been a huge problem for development banks. Banks created to intervene in agriculture, industry, and housing, which have been forced to convert to universal banks, with the erosion of their equity bases in some cases. These constitute internal monetary challenges. The external ones, since 1966, have been as daunting as the internal. In its economic history of 68 years, the country has had to go to the International Monetary Fund 17 times to repair its damaged structures and policies. The lack of discipline to maintain the economy and the dependence on donor budget support to keep it alive makes new growth avenues difficult. If one read the World Bank report on Ghana after Nkrumah's overthrow in 1966, the state of the economy under SAP, that is Structural Adjustment Program, 30 years later, and what happened before we went to the International Monetary Fund to seek 3 billion recently, little has changed. And it is not about growth, as indeed the economy grew from 3 billion in 1970 to an anticipated over 70 billion by 2024, depending on which source you believe in. The problem has been its growth characteristics. At least, there are two former ministers of finance who have advocated that we should have a permanent policy program with the IMF to ensure stability and growth, as we have always done better with them. If we look beyond the multilaterals and into the sub-regional organizations, such as the African Development Bank and the Economic Commission for West African States, we observe similar challenges. The decades-old West African Monetary Agency of ECOWAS and the West African Monetary Zone, together with this think tank, the West Africa Monetary Institute, have some of the African Central Bank governors as alumni. The role of the Association of African Central Bankers notwithstanding, there has still been difficulties in the convergences of currency, including the sad episode of the ECO and other objectives. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System of the African Export and Import Bank may have initiated some remedies to sub-regional and continental payments with the African Continental Free Trade Area since 2021. However, it is still the ancient markets at Tudu, Alaba, and at the borders who coordinate better. These challenges do not mean a bonfire of vanities. The 1950s and 60s were about cocoa and gold, timber and other natural resource receipts. With over 30 million Ghanaians now and an appreciable human development index, there is a huge diversification. Industrialization has grown with privatization of some state enterprises of the 1980s and 90s, and largely new ones. There is a private sector whose growth rate is the highest since independence, reflected in the membership and productions of the Association of Ghana Industries, which itself was established in 1957. From real estate, private energy production and supply, manufacturing of intravenous fusion drugs, food and beverages production, the operations of media and telecommunications businesses, which is, in percentage terms, one of the highest in sub-Saharan Africa, alongside the ever-present and pervading informal sector. From the one Ghana Commercial Bank established in 1953, serving a population of roughly 3 million, there were, as at 2022, 23 universal banks. From the PANAFEST in the late 1980s and facilities built around tourism, tourism has emerged sometimes as the third or fourth largest revenue earner. This implies investments in cultural heritage, from Fort Presenstein in Keita to Fort Apollonia in Benin. There have also been investments in telecommunication economics, whose billions of investments and mobile services add up. All of these have cumulatively increased the growth profile in generations of new muses. Sometimes it has done so through other investment channels and capital markets, including Ghana Stock Exchange. The development of new monetary cultures or reversion to the classical ideals should, like the main, be human-centered. It is not only about the monetary policy analysis, projections, and advisory services, triggered often by physical conditions with negative consequences of depreciation of the currency and instability, with implications on imports and servicing of domestic and foreign debts. I will conclude this lecture with a return to the universal man, John Maynard Keynes, who never sat an examination in economics, but pondered on general human difficulties through observation and reading. His prognosis partly led to a multilateral formula in the economic recovery of post-Second World War Germany. His booklet, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, made him a near clincher of eternal difficulties for other times, including the Greece debt crisis in 2008. Economics, he told us, is a matter of time and temper. How long is time and its corresponding temper in our situation? We have generations of younger people for whom the acquisition of knowledge through self-learning and understanding has ceased, and always has to be through acquisition of degrees, which in many cases count for less. There is little attention to details about their own selves and societies, and so it is difficult for young lawyers, bankers, engineers, and university lecturers to know the basic histories of their firms and banks, who the forebears of their faculties were, and what they did, which today provide their sustenance. Two former ministers of finance from both sides of the political divide, and we have two, as you all know, previously revealed that about 40% of our MPs cannot comprehend technical national budget statements. This obviously has implications on the politicized finance committee, public accounts, and others on multilateral and domestic debt contracts, debt repayments, and economic growth rates. With some MPs as parents in the shadows of the president, the coming years will see weakening leadership currency, a moral dilemma of Wesleyan concern, of end of faith as its beginning. It's also about an ethical equation of volunteer power seekers in search of electoral endorsements. Their electors should remember the French philosopher Jean-Joseph de Maistre of the late 1700s, who came to the conclusion after the French Revolution that every nation gets the government it deserves. In democratic dispensation, it's about the electors' choices, who they vote for. In other words, the measure you give is the measure you get. Keynes' central mantra that there should be extra government spending during times of poor economic growth and high unemployment is for us not when, but a permanent medication for survival. Our prodigal ways mark us out as outpatients of the IMF that he co-founded. In a generation, and with what should pass as a wounded pride to our promising nationhood, we complete IMF programs as a hallmark of success and of economic apologetics. Any oracle who tells us that it is not so and in the near future is an apprentice of his vocation. Yet, details of daily living are important in the micro and macro levels. In his speech to the 2024 graduating class at Princeton University, the leading Anglo-Ghanaian philosopher, Kwame Anthony Appiah, told the youth to pay attention to details as they step into the world, and that if you pay attention to details, attention will pay you back. Our formidable economist J.H. Mensah, who died in 2018, held similar views as our two philosophers, Keynes and Appiah. On a coincidental reflection of time in economic management in the Gold Coast and into the first decade of this century, J.H. Mensah was convinced of the soundness of the public policy of the National Planning Commission's work. To him, any economic philosophy should be detailed, sensitive, and sensible to welfare, food, clothing, shelter. He was not bothered with a socialist label in the 1960s, as he also became the Minister of Finance of the Bourgeois Liberal political party. He saw Keynes in socialism, and he also saw him in liberal orthodoxy. Many of Nkrumah's economic ideas, such as targeted nationalization and an industrial policy, he once explained, were liberal orthodoxies of the era, well within the Keynesian traditions. His argument was that in the 1960s, any self-respecting anti-colonialist would be a critic of the laissez-faire economic policies taken up by the political right and later by the World Bank and the IMF. as we say, we have carried water and we have carried drinks, and yet we do not see any difference between state welfareism and laissez-faire economic practices, because we have not done each very well. It all comes back to a deeper lack of self-belief, ethical leadership, and self-service versus public service. May the better angels of our nature be at the center of all our economic ideals, including the deeply piercing pains of the monetary policy options we pursue. And at the end, we should be sensitive to the things around us, and in particular, the new muses of our global futures. And as we, colleagues, family, and the legal establishment, remember yet again Kojo Bentsi-Enchill through this series of lectures previously delivered by the eminent Justice Professor Samuel Dateba and the Honorable Sir Nigel Boardman, the good Lord will bless our efforts at nation building and the sustainability of this world. Thank you.
A round of applause for Mr. Ivor Agyeman-Duah. Interesting thoughts about monetary policy and relevance. And just like what Mr. Divan Lecture will say, at the end of the day, what does it do to me? Does it put money in my pocket? Does it affect my salary, put food on the table, or reduce the cost of goods out there? And I know that debate will still go on and on about how these programs and policy measures by the Bank of Ghana is impacting everyone here in this room. Another round of applause for Mr. Ivor Agyeman-Duah. Interesting argument over there. Well, we're moving straight into our panel discussion. I'd like to call on, before I introduce our second panelist to join us, a quick introduction about him. He is called Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari. He is the third Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana. Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari is a distinguished economist and policymaker with almost 3 decades of experience in central banking and international finance, and has held senior positions at the International Monetary Fund and the Bank of Ghana. He is currently serves as the third Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana. Prior to his appointment, he was the third Deputy Governor. Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari worked in various positions at the International Monetary Fund for nearly a decade, where he rose from the position of Deputy Division Chief and also to a Mission Chief at the IMF. Prior to his tenure there, Mr. Opoku-Afari also worked for 13 years at the Bank of Ghana, where he rose to the position of Head of Special Duty Division, Research Department at the Bank of Ghana. Later, he served as a Specialist Assistant to the Governor of the Bank of Ghana. If I'm right, that was Mr. Polakwa, Dr. Polakwa. Yeah. And also, he also published extensive on monetary policy, including growth, aid effectiveness, capital flows, and real exchange rate dynamics. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our panelists, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari. Indeed, as we talk about monetary policy, it's good to have you here, Doc. Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana, Legon. She is affiliated with the Center for Research in Economic Development and International Trade at the University of Nottingham, and also the Africa Economic Research Consortium as well. Her research focuses on education, labor markets, gender, international trade and development economics, and she also authored several publications in these areas of specialization. She also collaborated and also worked on projects with international organizations, including the Swiss Agency for Development and also Cooperation, and also the African Economic Research Consortium, and also the International Development Research Center, and the International Labour Organization, and the Brookings Institute of Africa Center for Economic Transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour. She is our next panel for our discussion, and you'll be brought in also with your questions. And Doc Maxwell Opoku-Afari, I believe we are all respecting the Chatham House rules, so you can speak your mind when it comes to ask Dr. Mourinho. But first, I will join them in the Ivor. I'll first want to start with you first, to as you spoke about the monetary policy issues and how have we been guided by history in terms of what has been done in the past and what we're doing when it comes to this whole monetary policy and whether it's putting money in my pocket or is actually increasing my salary. For me, the whole idea about economics should be about growth. How good is your economy? When the economy is very good, and at least you're growing your economy, some of these issues of the fundamentals, and now the very popular phrase of when the fundamentals are good. But then, if the economy is growing well, these tend to have not the prime values that you will expect, because things will then fall in place. These numbers, these values could translate better in urban economics than, for instance, in rural economics. And so the growth monetary policy may not have the impact that people in some of the rural areas will experience if you go there and talk to them about some of these issues than those who are in the urban. And it's been so from independence. When even then, it wasn't that important because a large number of the population was within the periphery, so-called, in the rural setups. Let me bring in Doc, Priscilla Twumasi Baffour, for you as an economist as well. First, your quick thoughts on the presentation about monetary policy, where we've come from and where we are now. And there's still a whole debate out there about the relevance of even inflation targeting and all those things. But first, your quick thoughts on Ivor's presentation on the monetary policy and where we are today and its relevance to everyone out here.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm getting a bit unsettled because it appears the format has changed slightly, but that's okay. I must thank the organizers for the opportunity to be on this prestigious platform. I did not have the honor of meeting Mr. Kojo Bentsi-Enchill, but from what I've heard, he was a man of impact, and I hope that his memory continues to be a blessing. Indeed, listening to Ivor and having read his paper, I was wondering whether he actually left any room at all for us to discuss, but like it said, wherever there's a disagreement, you certainly find economists in the midst. I wonder, I'm in the midst of lawyers, so I have to be careful in that context. But indeed, it said when you pose a question to about 5 economists, you can get 5 different answers, and even 6, depending on the school they attended. And so, in this regard, going through Ivor's paper, I was quite surprised that we tend to agree on a lot of things this afternoon. So I am happy. What stands out for me, really, in terms of the paper and the angle he took it from, he looked at the historical antecedents of monetary policy development in the country. And in this regard, what comes out is the fact that the issues that existed pre-colonial era, independence, and then up till now, the issues basically remain the same. And so I keep asking myself, in the context of the world we live in now, why do we still face a number of the issues that we face? And also in his lecture, what basically he focuses on is the fact that the whole thought processes in terms of how economic theory has evolved was determined by social change and ideas of leaders. That was quite pivotal for me in the context that we shouldn't behave as robots in adopting these methodologies, but sometimes leadership ought to be novel and think out of the box to come out with solutions that are relevant at the time. So the fundamentals remain the same, and Ivor's paper did justice to that. And so for me, the question I ask is, what is the objective of monetary policy? And the objective of the central bank through the conduct of monetary policy is basically for price stability. And when you look at the different schools of thought that has informed informed economics in terms of the frameworks that are used, you see that Dr. Sowa indicated the Keynesian model believes that government ought to be actively intervening in the economy because the markets do not work perfectly. So in periods of a recession, there should be an intervention. And in this context, we find two different angles in carrying out these operations. The fiscal policy is from the government side, and then monetary policy is by Maxwell and Co. And so in that context, why is it relevant, the issues that are at stake? And like you indicated, now we are doing inflation targeting. We have moved from a controlled regime. There were issues with the controlled regime, essentially because we know that under the controlled regimes, governments borrowed at very low rates, which crowded out the private sector, so the private sector was not flourishing. That led us to, with all the issues, led us to the economic recovery program where we consistently liberalized, particularly the financial sector. The liberalization was supposed to take out some of the issues that existed under the controlled regime. But unfortunately, you find that although the liberalization, we brought in a more market-oriented approach to monetary policy, that is monetary targeting. We're using money supply to track inflation rates. That also had its issues, and particularly in the Ghanaian context, we realized that the relationship between money supply and inflation was not quite strong. And that is what led to the current model of inflation targeting. And here I must indicate that people always stress the inflation targeting regime we are currently undertaking. Is it working? Is it worth it? When you look at the data, it is evident that average inflation within the period of the inflation targeting is relatively lower than average inflation under the monetary targeting regime. I know you love asking that question, George. And so in that context, I think that I would wrap up and indicate that the issues Ivor assessed are quite pertinent. You see that in his development, you find that the economy has consistently been, we've been primary exporters of primary commodities, for instance. And that means that we are always susceptible to external shocks. And when you look at independence era till now, every time we have embarked on an IMF program, it is because of an external shock mainly, sometimes internal shocks around in the 80s with the bushfires and all that. But you see that the economy, although the structure has changed, a lot of the issues still remain the same. The fact is we are still import dependent. We send out primary commodities, but now we've developed taste for sophisticated manufactured products. And that means that every time our currency would be under pressure if nothing happens. Ivor indicated the issue of the informal sector, the parallel market in monetary policy. It is still here. And the informal sector is about 80% of the Ghanaian economy, and that has implications on tax revenue. So it means that we are not able to generate enough tax revenue. Governments persistently overspend, which is budget deficits. That has to be financed, either through domestic or external sources with implications all over. So in wrapping up, I am quite, I don't know the expression to use, but the issues remain the same, and it is quite sad that we are not really working to change the kind of economy that existed at the time of independence till date.
I'll come back. Thank you. I'll come back to you, Doc, whether the challenge is a policy issue or is about a structural issue. But let me bring in the First Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, who is here. First, a quick thought on the presentation by Ivor, and also the argument about the fact that how your policies have not been responsive to the market. People think that the Bank of Ghana is rigid, is caught up in inflation targeting, and it's all about inflation targeting, no matter how it hurts people or not. But first, your quick thoughts on the presentation and the question about a flexible central bank.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether you can hear me. Thank you very much, George. And let me also thank Bella for inviting me and also for instituting this lecture. I actually know Mr. Bentsi-Enchill. We interacted a lot, so I'm happy to be here. And listening to Dr. Soa, actually Dr. Soa was one of his students, so he taught me monetary economics, I think in 1991. Yeah. And then we worked together on the Monetary Policy Committee. So, but to come back to your question, listening to Dr. Soa and listening to my friend Ivor, it took me back to when I was sitting in an economic talks and history class, moving to learning about all this. But it is not different from what we've seen in Ghana. And so Ivor has actually intertwined the evolution of economic thought and history with that of evolution of monetary policy and economic policy in general in Ghana. And you realize that they've moved in tandem. I mean, you talk about the classical school, then you came to the Keynesians who were rebutting the classicals by saying that the Keynesians thought that yes, monetary policy can have an effect on real activities. Then the classicals sat there and said they were not going to lose the fight. So they came with a rebuttal to say that that's the neoclassical, saying that, oh, yes, maybe in the short run, but in the long run, monetary policy will only have effect on nominal variables. So that is the neoclassical. And the argument was on the fact that prices are sticky downward. Then the Keynesians didn't sit down. That's the part that Dr. Soa didn't add. So they came back with the new Keynesian model that combined the neoclassical with the Keynesian model to try to see where rational expectations can fit into the Keynesian activity. But that also mimics what we've seen in Ghana. We started with direct control regime, then we moved to monetary targeting regime after the structural adjustment program, and then we moved from monetary targeting regime to an inflation targeting light regime, where we learned lessons, and then we moved from there to actual inflation targeting regime. But I would say that that swift change from monetary targeting to inflation targeting regime is due to His Excellency the President, former President Baffour, by leading the process to bring about a new Bank of Ghana Act at 2002 that introduced an operational independent central bank, giving a mandate to the central bank to focus on price stability. But then the Constitution also adds to that mandate by saying that the central bank will support economic growth. So I think it's important that this lecture is being organized by a law firm. So let's situate the discussion in the law and look at the operating law and the way the central bank is operating, and to assess the central bank based on its functions and its mandate. And the mandate is what? Price stability. It actually has only one mandate, price stability. We have to support financial stability and support growth. But your mandate is price stability. So when you want to assess the central bank, the impact of monetary policy on economic development, then you have to assess it based on how the central bank has been able to create an enabling environment of price stability to support economic development. Let me go back to Ivor's presentation. He talked about Keynesian. You see, Keynesian was not talking to the central banks. Keynesian was talking to the fiscal authorities. Keynesian was looking at aggregate demand. In fact, that's what they call the helicopter economics. He thought that you could actually put money in the helicopter and fly it and drop the money down. By increasing aggregate demand, you increase output, and for that matter, you address the problem. So he was not focusing on central bank to use his policy to address the challenges. The central bank was supposed to create the enabling environment for aggregate demand to be able to impact on economic activity on the assumption that price is what? Stable. But prices were not stable. So that's what happened in Keynesian theory field. And if Keynesian went to the IMF, to the Bretton Woods institution, to Bretton Woods, to help to address the challenges, they did not just create IMF. So it comes back to the theory. They created an institution called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which later became World Bank. They were the ones to drive change, drive transformation, and drive growth. And then they created the International Monetary Fund to tell the whole world that we can no longer focus on just aggregate demand, but we needed another institution to ensure that as IBRD is driving change, there is a monetary system that is supporting it to ensure that that change does not undermine the whole process. So that's how we should see the role of the central bank. So from there, then let me come to your second part of the question. Inflation targeting. Because of that, people have misunderstood inflation targeting. Right? But Dr. Sowa actually described it so nicely that I don't think I should add anything more to that. Inflation targeting framework is done in Ghana under what we call the FPAS, Forecasting Policy and Analysis Systems. So that system is a system that allows you to have a more focused discussion on the economy. So it's not only about inflation, and it's not only about interest rate. We have every sector of this economy discussed during the MPC period. We even have surveys on job advertisements to get a sense of demand for labor and supply for labor. We have different indicators in the system that we look at to be able to assess and make a decision as to how do we then place an interest rate to be able to support economic activity. Mind you, I've already said that there is another institution that has to focus on the Keynesian side, and we have to focus on creating the enabling environment, which is price stability. And so we focus on that, and then the other institutions, we have so many of them, focusing on how to deliver on the transformation and change, and we see how the two together deliver on economic growth. When we meet as MPC, one thing we tell ourselves is that monetary policy cannot answer all the questions. You have one mandate and you have one instrument. That instrument is interest rate, and its target is on what? One mandate, which is prices. You cannot use the same instrument, one instrument, to address multiple objectives. If you have that framework, then you begin to understand the work of the Monetary Policy Committee, and for that matter, the function of the central bank. Lastly, to add on to what Priscilla said, if you do the evolution of monetary policy in Ghana, from direct control, I actually had a nice chart, I wish I had projected it on. From the direct control to money targeting, to inflation targeting light, to inflation targeting regime. The only period where you've had low and stable inflation for a long period of time is under inflation targeting regime. That's the only period. All the other periods, you have high and volatile inflation. The only period that you've had low and stable inflation over a period of time is under inflation targeting regime. The only period that you have stable growth is under the inflation targeting regime. There are periods you had high growth, but volatility in growth is no good for us. The only period you've had stable growth is under the inflation targeting regime. So I'll leave the jury out there to assess whether the central bank has played its role.
But Dr. Thank you so much. Thank you. But Doc, I was talking back to you about the argument about the flexibility of your framework, since you make us understand that we are working within the laws and we should respect that. But there are some who have said that sometimes it appears that the Bank of Ghana is not that responsive to the real issues on the ground by the actions you take with respect to the economy.
I thought I answered that question by reflecting on what Dr. Sowa said.
Maybe let's get down to the 101. So let's go away from the theories to more practical issues and how they relate to people.
Dr. Sowa answered that question for me. The MPC is very flexible. It looks at multiple indicators, everything, to take a decision. That's flexibility. Right. You look at everything. But one thing that we should all know is that it is extremely expensive to lose price stability. And when we lose price stability, those who suffer the most are the poor and the vulnerable. You cannot afford to lose price stability. If there's anything at all, just look back at 2022 and 2023, then you understand what I mean by it is extremely expensive to lose price stability. So in looking at all these multiple indicators, the central bank is guided by the fact that if you have a balance of risk, that's what the MPC looks at. What is the balance of risk? If you look at the balance of risk, if the balance is tilted towards inflation, then your mandate comes in. At the same time, looking at growth and other factors, if you look at them and they are not too compromised, but you are going to have inflation getting out of hand, then you realize that whereas everybody is looking the other way, the MPC will be focusing on price stability. Why? Because it's also the only committee in Ghana that has next to real-time data compared to any other institution or any other entity in the country. So they have more information than any other entity in the country to be able to tell you why they took that decision they took.
Let me bring in Mr. Agyeman-Duah here. Let's look at what is happening right now in this economy. And let's look at whether the Bank of Ghana and its monetary policy framework and inflation targeting has actually impacted or been able to turn things around for us. So it appears that the economy is still not responding to the theories and the frameworks and everything that you're putting out.
I think we should all be fair to this economy from what it's gone through. It's not been a normal time, and the bank itself has had to change so much. They have had to relook at the policies that they started even the year with. The debt sustainability, the domestic debt sustainability issue that came, the foreign one that had to be addressed, and even the supporting of the financing of government that also happened in the course of the year. These were issues that were never thought through. And of course, people tend to make fun of the Ukraine war. I don't know Maxwell, but the Ukraine war was real, and it affected our economy in some way. So if you put the political economy of some of the issues aside, we began the year not knowing what the bank had will work or it will not work. So I think sometimes we need to be a bit flexible with them on some of the issues that have come up. We keep talking of the inflation rate, we keep talking of monetary policy, we keep talking of all the indicators. But sometimes you can also have some of the indicators right, and still no growth will be registered or not much will change.
Let me bring in Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour in here. Are we demanding so much from the Bank of Ghana in terms of what they are supposed to do? Because some would say that at the end of the day, the real economy is about the fiscal policy. And if they are not supporting the Bank of Ghana, maybe we shouldn't blame the bank so much when the inflation is high, because they can do what they have to do within a limited framework.
Right. I think that for sound economic policy management, you need a strong coordination between fiscal policy and monetary policy.
And is that happening?
You don't find that kind of language. I may be wrong, Deputy. you don't tend to. Why am I saying that? So, for example, if you look at, the basic Keynesian model, in periods of a recession. The whole idea is that what do? Government should stimulate demand, right? So the contrast is that if the economy is also not doing too great, we are having challenges with inflation, then you would understand that the monetary policy perspective would be to try to control the liquidity that is in the system, reduce the money that is out there through an increase in the prime rates. When that is done, you do not expect that the fiscal side will be doing business as usual. You would want to expect that the fiscal side would also do some cutting back so that the two policies are in sync. And that is what we mean by when there is basically a contractionary monetary policy linked with a contractionary fiscal policy, then you get the outcome that you desire. But if monetary policy is consistently contracting the system, yet the fiscal side is spending and pumping it there, then it basically means that you don't get the outcome that is required.
Yeah, you want to make a quick comment, sir?
Every economy has two components, and we know which one is stronger, the physical and the monetary. President Kufuor is here, but I don't think for governors who are not elected by the people, politicians, when they feel strongly about certain monetary matters, will allow governors the absolute ways to do things that they feel will not help some of the political choices that they have to make. And it's not just here. It started with the Second World War. And in the literature, some people are saying that when the Second World War came, people were asking the politicians of what went wrong. But these days, it's the central bankers who have to answer this question. And people also ask when they haven't been elected by anybody. So it's always the case. The two components, the stronger side will always prevail. But we also need a balance. For the sake of growth, for the sake of the moral economy, we will always need a balance. And that balance is what the two will have to always.
Are you suggesting that we should elect our governors in Mexico? They are looking at whether the judges should be elected or not. And even in the MCs and DCs, you are still struggling with it. Would you encourage it?
No, 2 years ago, I think less than 2 years ago, when the president of Turkey decided to sack the central bank governor, the whole stock exchange almost crashed because they trusted the central banker more than the president of Turkey. So it depends on which situation you find it. But whatever it is, the governor wasn't elected. So there should always be that balance between the two. Otherwise, there will be issues.
But George, let me come in here quickly. I will not go there. I want to still go back on the effectiveness and digging in on what Ivor said, that Keynes was resurrected after the global financial crisis. And then after COVID, all over the world, we saw how fiscal authorities injected resources into the economy. You see, and all over the world, including Ghana, prior to COVID, inflation had been in single digits consistently for close to 30 months. And then getting close to end of 2020, we started seeing inflation going up. Then it came down again. We ended 2021 with inflation of 12.6%. Then we started seeing the effects of the COVID spending and others coming through. But that was not Ghana alone. In 2022, we saw inflation moving straight from the 12.6% to 54%. If you go to US, inflation moved 5 times. If you go to Kenya, it moved 4 times. If you go to Rwanda, it moved 3-4 times. If you go to England, it moved 4-5 times. Then central banks after 2022 started working to bring inflation down. That's what happens when you allow the fiscal to interact or to act during times of crisis. Yes, you're able to have a short-term effect, but there are consequences you have to deal with after that. And globally, we have all seen how central banks have struggled to bring inflation down. We've seen them coming down in US, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in England, and we've seen inflation coming down from 54% at the end of 2022 to now 20%, 20.9%. So that's how effective monetary policy is when there is proper coordination between the fiscal and monetary policy.
Bringing in the audience for their questions and contributions, but before I come to the talk, I'll still throw the question back to you again. Our current challenges with the city, again, is it a monetary policy failure, or it's more of a fiscal and a fundamental challenge? Because there is still an impact on an effective monetary policy framework and how at least it could stabilize. Like every currency all over the world blips, even the dollar is struggling right now. But look at the levels of depreciation of the city and the struggles it's going through. Has your inflation targeting, has your monetary policy thing worked to help in that space?
I think it's important that we trace back where the challenges of the city came from. In 2017, the city depreciated by 4%, 2018 by 7%, 2019 by 5%, and 2020 also around the same percentage. To define a currency to be stable, it has to move between plus or minus 5 percentage points. So if you have such a trend, that should tell you that even though that's not our primary mandate, our primary mandate has a consequence, and the consequence is delivering stability in the currency. Then you had the crisis of 2022. And if you have a crisis like that, that can deliver the currency to depreciate within a month by 10%, within 2 weeks, by 10 percentage points. That completely dislodges the anchor that is holding the currency. You are then shut down from the global financial markets. You are shut down even from the domestic market. Every year, your economy depends on 3 billion cedis from the international capital markets. They are not coming in. Meanwhile, every year, you are supposed to pay investors you are supposed to pay out about 4 billion cedis. So if in 2023, you did not get a 3 billion coming in, but you are paying out 4 billion, that alone should tell you where are you getting the money from. You're drawing down on your reserves. And if you are drawing down your reserves, economic agents are watching. Because if your reserves were 8 billion and all of a sudden you've drawn down 4, if you're an economic agent and the country is still locked out from the international capital market, what will be your calculation? Your calculation is that by the next year, the other 4 will be 0. So what will you do? You start reacting. And when you start reacting, then I think almost about 80% of us in this room will be will be guilty of that. Individuals started building their own reserves. People were buying FX and hoarding. They are building their own reserves instead of the central bank building reserves on behalf of the economy. And if individuals are buying, this is what we call notional demand, and the dollars are not coming in, the simple law of demand and supply tells you what will happen. Prices will go up. And that is why the going back to the IMF brought a solution at the end of the tunnel, because then the central bank started rebuilding reserves. And when that happened, in 2023, you saw the currency depreciation came back to where it used to be between 2017 and 2018. Of course, we've moved into a period where there's so much noise and uncertainty. And I think we've all heard before that money doesn't like noise. So if there's so much noise and uncertainty, you understand what is happening to the currency now. While the central bank has demonstrated strongly, and the numbers show, 2023 we built 2 billion additional reserves when the program was supposed to lead to a build-up of 400 million. We built 2 billion, 5 times. So the central bank has a lot of reserves that should not warrant the depreciation that we are seeing in the economy. So that should tell you that the depreciation you are seeing is not being driven by the fundamentals, but it's driven by noise and uncertainty. And that is what is driving it, because the individuals that are buying and building their own reserves are not releasing it back to the market. Everybody is holding on to it and continuing to build, thinking that maybe, who knows, we may need a reserve somewhere.
But every rational human being will react.
That's rational expectation, right?
But Doc, I'll come back to Dr. Priscilla Twumasi as well. For those who would argue that, what about those who might argue that there's correction taking place when it comes to the currency? Because redenomination, former president is here. There's someone who saying that there has to be a correction, and maybe that is taking place.
Redenomination was not okay. It's too crazy. Okay.
Right. It's to me. Okay. So, is correction taking place? Basically, when I get asked the issue of the depreciation of the currency, I keep saying that we need to get back to basics because it's an issue of demand and supply. Like Dr. Maxwell indicated, we don't print the dollar here. It's somebody's currency we are demanding. And so for that matter, for everything we supply the cedi to buy the dollar for, certainly the cedi will lose value, the dollar will gain value. And so in that context, for me, the issues are fundamentally has the structure of the economy changed? Those are the issues. So the supply, what are the sources of foreign exchange coming in? Basically through exports, right? Our export basket is very lean, consisting basically of primary commodities. We do not add value to our export baskets. And so minerals, cocoa, everything is living in its primary form. And in that sense, it means that primary commodities do not command a lot of value on the international market. On the other hand, when you look at the demand side, we are demanding everything imported. And the theory indicates that in the long run, terms of trade is always worsening for countries that export primary commodities. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And that is why when we hear issues of governments planning towards import substitution, industrialization, those are the kinds of conversations we should be having to strengthen the cedi in the long run.
I'll come back to this. I still need to invite our audiences, so get the mics ready. Our guys at the back there. Quick contribution. I'll plead with you to be very brief with your contributions, if there's questions as well. We can do 3 sets each, and then I come to you, and then so if there's one gentleman at the far end there, the microphone should get to him. There's one also here. Let me start first with the extreme right. Okay, you can go ahead, please.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Peter Das. I work with Abuela Holdings Limited as an Economic and Product Research Officer. So my first question goes to the one who gave the lecture. That is
Ivor Agyeman-Duah.
Exactly. So you were saying that some previous ministers were saying we should have a permanent program with the IMF. Is this something that you share in? And then because we seem to perform better anytime that we are under an IMF program. So is this something that you share the same view? And then my last question is to the Deputy Speaker.
First Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana.
Exactly. So the question is,
oh yes, I need to be very careful, let's speak to it.
Exactly. So the question is, how best do we deal with fiscal dominance so that it does not always dwarf the hard work that you are doing at the Bank of Ghana? Thank you.
Should we do 3 set of questions each or 2? So another one here. So first is about whether we should stick to the IMF, because under an IMF program, we've seen the numbers showing some stellar results for the economy, and also the bit about fiscal dominance and how it's impacting on your program. Your name and where you're coming from, and then straight ahead with your question, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Edmond. My question goes to Dr. Priscilla Twumasi. The exportation of primary product has been identified as one of the major causes why we are not getting foreign exchange. This has been discussed several times. In your own estimation and your experience, what has been preventing us from actually adding value to our primary products to export to get foreigners?
So more value addition to our primary exports. Yes, sir.
My name is Apia Adumakon, CATS International. My question is that for the past couple of years, we've seen that we've had trade surplus tilting the side of the country, and yet we are having challenges with the US dollar to support our import. One thing that we have seen is that because the Bank of Ghana has not been keen about the security of the currency, we've seen that some people are coming into the country to buy CDs, come with safers and buy dollars and smuggle the currency away, causing the shortages. People are flying from Abuja on hour, they come here in the morning, they are able to buy $20,000 and take them back into Nigeria. Some of these things are going on, it's putting a lot of pressure on the city. In some countries, we know that US set up their secret service to protect its currency from all other nefarious activities. I want to hear from you, to what extent is BOG working with the security agencies to ensure that we're able to protect the Ghana cedi against bad practices? Thank you.
About the FX movement and the short term. So let me first start with you, the concerns about when we are under IMF program, the data resources, should we just sign Infinity, a program with the fund as well?
Well, it's not it's not something, I don't think I have the power to say we should do that. But it's an option that has come up because you go to the IMF when you cannot discipline yourself, when you cannot discipline your economy. And then once you go in and they give you the conditions that, well, if we're going to give you money, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. And you come home and you are able to fulfill those conditions and you get the money. That is a step. But the question to us is, why were you not able to work around those conditions that will straighten or make your own policies better? If you cannot, then somebody steps in. It's not a matter of conditions, but it's a matter of your own indiscipline. Secondly, we also shouldn't forget that in the last 30 years, we've been trying to change the structure of the financial system. It started with the FinCEP, that is the Financial Sector Adjustment Program, that was started as part of the Structural Adjustment Program. It was based on that we had the Forex bureaus. Before then, the money changers were those who are still under the market, what we call the black market. And it was based on that the consistories of the world were able to come out as that established the Forex bureaus. But yet, Ghanaians as we were and are, we managed to still find ways of dealing with the black market systems. And Maxwell was talking about us building reserves. So you come out with laws, you come out with acts that says that you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't buy dollar. So why do we do that? We do that for the same motivation that the black market is also engaged. So it's a matter of discipline not just of systems, but also of individuals. We tend to take ourselves out of the systems as if we are not part of the systems.
Doug Baffour, the question about the primary commodity exports and what we should do about that. Yeah.
Right. So we've talked extensively about the need for us to add value to export products. But like you said, why are we not doing that? It takes a plan, if you ask. It takes a long-term plan for us to strategize to say, for example, if you look at the cocoa sector, for instance, it's a very important foreign exchange earner. If a government comes in to say that, no, I'm buying the cocoa this year, I'm not sending any raw cocoa beans elsewhere, it means that there will be a very significant hole in terms of the foreign exchange that will come in. And also we are dealing with external partners. So for example, what options exist in terms of us trying to, in the short to medium term, starting something small to add little value? So for example, can we have a policy where, for instance, anything that leaves the country, we should at least add one level of value that will create jobs for young people that are looking for jobs. But in doing that, you need the macroeconomic environment to be stable, because you need people to have the capacity to do that. Cost of credit is important. Will they have access to credit? We need energy. Would they have constant supply of energy at affordable prices where the products that will be produced will be internationally competitive? So it's a broad discussion that we should have a long-term plan as a country. I'm afraid something like this is not attainable within a 4-year election cycle. And so in that context, if we are serious to achieve some of these things, we should have a longer plan towards them.
Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, the debate about what we should be doing and all the fiscal dominance question, the concerns about how to ensure that when it comes to the FX movement and all the rest. Yes.
Thank you very much. On the fiscal dominance, clearly it's one of the conditions that one has to check before inflation targeting can be very effective. And the law, the Act, Bank of Ghana Act, makes provision for that. And it's been in the Act since 2002, where the central bank cannot support budget financing beyond 5% of previous year's tax revenue. So this is the law. And if you look at history, at least from, in fact, it was more than 5% in 2002. Then the amendment of the Act in 2016 reduced it to 5%. Actually, the objective was to send it to 0, but it did not get there, so it got to 5%. But from 2016, you realize that 2017, central bank financing was 0. 2018, central bank financing of the budget was 0. 2019, central bank financing of the budget was 0. 2020, central bank had to trigger Section 30 of the Act for the emergency financing for COVID. So bought government COVID bond of 10 billion. So that is not 0 because we financed government by 10 billion. But that was also by triggering the Section 30 of the Act. Then you come to 2021, central bank financing was 0. Then we went to 2022. That's when the central bank had to take a very painful, difficult decision to trigger that session again when the country lost access to the international market and the domestic auctions were failing, and virtually the government did not have resources to support economic activity, to support the running of the economy. Central bank had to come in with discussions with the IMF to be able to then trigger the session again, 30, to support government financing. So this is why we see fiscal dominance under control. And in the periods where you realize that fiscal dominance was not under control, you realize that inflation also went up in those 2 periods. So fiscal dominance is extremely important for delivering of the central bank mandate. In 2023, central bank financing of government was 0. And in 2024, up to today, central bank financing of government has been 0. So since 2017, you've realized that it's only 2 years that the emergency financing section of the Act was triggered. So that shows how fiscal dominance is being checked. It's being checked by the law. Then we come back to the
FX movement.
Yes, we've had trade surpluses, and it's asking about the fact that others are coming in and then buying the FX and going and adding to the depreciation. We're working with the security agencies to check on that, and I think if you've been following the news recently, they've paraded a few people that they've arrested, but those are not lasting solutions to the problem. What is a lasting solution is that in last 2 months, the Bank of Ghana has introduced countrywide an electronic system for foreign exchange purchases at the Forex Bureau. So every single Forex Bureau is hooked to a central system at the central bank. And when you go there to transact in FX, it takes your Ghana card to check before you're able to transact. Once that happens, you are in the system. So anyone who is coming from outside who does not have the Ghana card is not expected, the word is expected, to be able to transact. But you can get Ghanaians using their Ghana card to transact for such individuals. And what we've also observed as part of the teething problems is that we are finding Ghanaians who are saying that as soon as I walk into the bureau and they say, bring your Ghana card, they say, no. Then they step out and they go to the para market to go and change. So it's really about us changing our attitude and going by the structures that have been introduced to permanently address this problem.
Thank you so much, Doc. Can I do last 2 questions or 3 because of time constraints as well? Gentleman in the middle here, please. Your hand right here.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ivor Agyeman-Duah, so my question actually goes to Dr. Maxwell. And so my question is, as Bank of Ghana considers issuing the ECD or the retail CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency, how could this affect how monetary policy transmission works in Ghana?
Doc, did you get a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me do here, sorry, the lady at the far end there, please.
I was beginning to get worried about your gender balance on your questions. Good evening. My name is Mavis Owusu-Jenfi. I work with ASED. Dr. Opoku-Afari, I have a question for you. Can I begin by saying excellent lecture, Ivor, really powerful and thought-provoking. Doc, my question for you is this. A number of eminent African scholars, like Celestine Monga, are questioning our adaptation of global monetary policy and saying that Africa's economy is not robust enough to follow those protocols. So they are questioning the role of the central bank and saying that whilst we are heavily dependent on a handful of exports, raw materials, which leaves us fragile to global economies, the central bank should have a critical role to play in terms of our structural transformation agenda on the continent, like doing better on deepening our financial systems, taking some bold decisions which might shift us away from the traditional normative approach of monetary policy as we know it. I would love to hear your views on that thinking from our eminent economists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me do the last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Amable from Bentsi-Enchill Lecture in Nkuma. I just want to piggyback on the conversation on fiscal dominance. Often when the conversation regarding when Ghana lost its access to the global capital markets is framed, it's framed as if we lost access in 2022. But we know that we actually lost access in 2021. And I just want to read this short Fitch wire from November 2021. It says, Ghana's effective loss of access.
Sorry, Rodin, those who are managing the PA system, can you help us? Doc says he can hear the question, please. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, so I'll take it again. I'm saying that often when the conversation on when Ghana lost access to the international capital markets is framed, it's framed as if we lost access in 2022. But we lost access in 2021 after we did a Eurobond of about 3 billion in March. We wanted to do another one in October, and we couldn't access it because of conditions. And I have a Fitch wire from November 2021, which reads that Ghana's effective loss of access to international markets increases risk to its ability to meet medium-term financing needs. Ghana has sufficient liquidity to cover near-term debt servicing without market financing. But there is danger that non-resident investors in the local bond market could sell their holdings, particularly if confidence in fiscal consolidation weakens. Now, when the Bank of Ghana issued its press statement on its annual report for 2022, in the third paragraph of that statement, it actually speaks to the fact that in 2021, when the government was reading its budget, the market expected fiscal consolidation, but the government's budget was rather expansionary by over 20%. And as a result, when we went into 2022, when you look at foreign investor participation in our local capital markets, you realize there's a lot of capital flight, where lots of investors, we lost about $3 billion of investment in that year. So in having the conversation, this is sort of the background, the factual background That then led to the situation where the government had an expansionary budget in 2022, and the central bank then helped the government to finance that budget, and then started doing inflation targeting by increasing the MPR. Now, I just want to ask if that is not counterintuitive, and if that does not defeat the purpose, because how do you then, seeing these signs from 2021, go into 2022, finance central government budget, and then do inflationary targeting through increasing the MPR? Thank you.
So if I get your question, you think that we lost the market access way before they covered?
No, I don't think. It's actually a fact that we lost this in 2021.
According to you, you're a lawyer.
I just read the Fitch report it's a global Fitch wire. Everybody can read it, from November 2021. We wanted to raise $1 billion in October. We couldn't raise it. Since then, we were not able to return to the market. So this was way before 2022. And Fitch actually forecasted that if fiscal consolidation did not happen, then foreign investors in our local bond markets were going to be afraid for their ability to get their money, and that would lead to capital flight. And when you look at the data from 2022, that's actually what happened. So that was what happened. Nobody was financing our auctions because the local people here were also seeing it. And then Bank of Ghana stepped in to finance the government, and then started punishing us all by increasing MPR.
So thank you so much. Let me go to the other end. I saw a lady's hand over there, if I can do last 2 questions, and then we are done. Yeah. The lady at the far end there, please.
My name is Tekla Rickett. My question goes to Dr. Priscilla Baffour. Thank you. I think I loved your presentation. With what you have highlighted as our problem, our inability to add value to our raw materials for export, would you recommend, as part of government policies or as part of monetary policies, that focus is drawn towards the economic and free zones where we see them adding value to our raw materials purposely for export as a means of, or should I say, a short-term resolution of our fiscal policy challenges?
So more value addition, right? Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour. Okay, that question will come back to it. Last one, yeah.
Thank you. Being in the midst of lawyers, I'm tempted to really litigate an argument I had with Dr. Maxwell some time ago, but we don't have the time. We keep hearing about adding value and all of that. Now, why aren't we doing so? Simply a function of the capital markets. If inflation, obviously I don't agree with, what he says about inflation targeting, because what is the mechanism through which the policy is expected to affect the real economy? If you want to affect the demand side, you're dealing with an economy in which demand is not financed by credit. Money is more important as an input into production because it's entrepreneurs like me who go and borrow, not our customers. So when you increase the cost of funds, you are actually raising the cost of production. And so, Dr. Twumasi, that is why we are not adding value. Where are we getting the money from? To produce and add value. Anyone who has a sensible project in this country depends on external financing. We're in a situation where Ghanaian capital has no appetite for Ghanaian risk. So those who borrow locally are those who cannot get money externally. And it's all because our capital market is inefficient and so and expensive. So when we say we are increasing, we are targeting inflation, we should realize that we are squeezing producers. That's exactly what we are doing. So maybe we should think beyond the theory to what's really happening in the economy. And if Maxwell still disagrees, I have a few projects that I invite him to put his personal money into. And then he's...
Thank you so much. And Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari will have time. So, Doc, Priscilla Twumasi Baffour, the question about value addition, then we move to Doc because a lot of the questions were targeted at him.
Right. I think that the issue of the value addition in economic processing zones, it ties in perfectly. And so basically, with these economic processing zones, we know that we are a developing country. We cannot extend all the infrastructure to every aspect of the country. And so why don't we aggregate producers of specific goods in an area, support them with all the infrastructural needs so that they can add value. And in that regard, the discussion is in diversifying the export baskets, we need to add new products and add value to the new products. The existing ones that are in the basket, we have to also add value, because the more technically complex the export basket becomes, then the higher the value you will command abroad. And that quickly ties into the gentleman who asked the last question. Yes, cost of capital is important, but it's not everything. I must tell you, and this is not just theory. It is basically based on evidence of research we've done. Firms face a lot of challenges in this country. Capital is one of the major problems, but there are issues with even the skills that are required. The manpower for the production of the goods and services, a lot of firms do not get them. In terms of the infrastructure, it is a problem. And so when we talk about these things, we expect that government will put policies in place so that firms are supported in all these areas so that it becomes more attractive for value addition rather than basically the business as usual.
Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, the next set of questions and your answers, please.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the last one because that's the one that is fresh in my mind. No, thank you very much for your question, and I think Dr. Priscilla Twumasi seemed to have answered a part of the question for me. But as I said, the Bank of Ghana deals with data, and our policies are data-based, evidence-based policies. So yes, people can say that, oh, nobody gets bank credit and we finance our production from other sources. But the survey data that we look at Bank of Ghana before we take decisions, the number one source of financing activities for manufacturers in this country is borrowing from banks. Whether it's big firms or SMEs, the number one source is borrowing from banks. So you may have data there that tells you that maybe you borrow from external sources, which I will come to, but the majority of the people here borrow from banks, and that's where we even have a problem. We would have wished that they don't borrow from banks. One would wish that when firms and manufacturing entities progress, they rather begin to go to the stock exchange, the capital markets. At that time I was speaking to the capital markets and I said that it's about time we move away from the IOSCO principles and move from capital markets to market for capital. And there is a difference between the two. Market for capital is what Vietnam did, where small entities can come to that place and have access to capital without going through the IOSCO principles, which are so daunting for them to be able to meet before they borrow. That is where businesses are supposed to look at, not even banks. But sadly, most of them are borrowing from banks. And if you are borrowing from external sources, I'm afraid monetary policy also has an impact on you. Because when we say the monetary policy has an implication on exchange rate, and you are borrowing from external sources to produce and make CDs and pay back in external foreign currency, that has implication on your productivity. So yes, monetary policy is extremely important, and as I said, that our mandate is one, price stability, and it's extremely important that we create that enabling environment where prices are low and stable, and exchange rate is stable to allow you to plan, to allow you to borrow at a level where you can make enough profit out of that. So
I have a lot to say to that, but we don't have the time.
Yes. Then I think this ties into the third question. No, the second, from my sister from ASEC. Fortunately, the eminent scholars, the paper they did, which you are referring to or you are speaking to, I also happen to be the one that had to comment on that paper. And if you go back and you read my comments, I disagreed with them. And not as a person, the central bank disagrees with their conclusions in that paper. They are calling back to us going back to Keynesian economies where the central bank will go back to intervening directly in the economy. And as Ivor said, when I joined the bank as a young officer in 1995, we had what we call the Development Finance Department. We had a cattle ranch, we had poultry, we had bread factories. We were doing so many things. We did everything. We tried it here in Ghana. We've tried everything. It did not deliver the results they are looking for. It did not deliver the results we are looking for. And so we need to have an open discussion whether we're coming back to where we want the central bank to play a role beyond its mandate of price stability. Then we can have a more open discussion. And if that is what we want to do as a country, then we do. But all that they are proposing, we've tried it in this country. We started from direct control, we came to monetary aggregates, we came to inflation targeting light, and this is where we are. And I'm saying that our discussion should be supported by data. If you put this evolution together and you look at the mandate of the central bank, under all this regime, the only period that we've had low and stable inflation is under this current regime. That's the only period. And you measure that by looking at the volatility in prices and the level of prices. And that is the only period that we've had low and stable inflation environment. And that is what you need as a businessman to support you to take decisions to produce. We create the enabling environment for you to be productive. And if we're able to achieve low and stable inflation, we have created or achieved our mandate. That doesn't mean that we sit down and we do not do anything beyond that. The Constitution enjoins us to set out to support economic growth. As we sit here to support agricultural production, we set up what we call the GESEL that mitigates risk for agri farmers to be able to borrow from commercial banks with insurance so that their borrowing rates will be lower because the risk mitigation factor has been put in there already. That was set up by the Bank of Ghana before it was hived off as an entity called GESEL. So the central bank goes beyond that. But what the mandate says is that in trying to do that, it should not compromise your primary objective. And your primary objective is price stability. So we can do all that without compromising your primary objective, which is price stability. Once we do that, and all other entities are also playing their role, we will realize that there is cohesion of policies, the policy mix is right, and you begin to see economic transformation taking place. Monetary policy alone cannot deliver economic transformation. Economic transformation has to be deliberate policy by different agencies, targeting different sectors, and trying to transform and diversify the economy. It is not monetary policy that can do that. Then I go to the third question from our gentleman. He is emphatically sure that Ghana lost access in 2021, whilst I am emphatically sure that in 2021 we went to the market and I was part of the team that met the investors and we were able to borrow 3 billion Ghana cedis. That was March. But March is 2021, yes. Or isn't it 2021? We didn't go again, or at least I didn't go.
And you know you have some lawyers here.
And I'm an integral part of the team that goes to meet the investors. I didn't go. I think whoever wrote that or yourself have mixed up your parts. Access to the international capital market is different from foreign investors participating in our domestic economy. And the person writing that was speaking about foreign investor participation in our domestic economy, trying to buy bonds in Ghana, local bonds. And as we started some time back, we had 40% of our domestic debt being held by foreign investors. That exposes the country to external vulnerabilities. So there was a deliberate policy to reduce that percentage, and so we started working through liability management to reduce it gradually to around 12%, which is what we saw in 2021. So if you see the percentage of domestic debt being held by foreign investors going down in 2021, that is as a result of deliberate policy to minimize external vulnerabilities, because once they want to leave, that is FX living. So you don't want them to control a greater portion of your domestic debt that you are issuing in the country. So that was a deliberate policy. It was in February 2022 when we had Moody's coming to Ghana to do their assessment, and they issued a report to downgrade Ghana. And that downgrade is what effectively locked Ghana out of the international capital markets. That report was issued in February 2022. So Ghana did not lose access to the international capital markets in October 2021 because we did not even go to the market for you to say that you've lost access. There was no attempt to go to the international capital market in October 2021. So I think that clarifies, and this is facts, and this is data. Then the last question is ECB. Fortunately for Ghana, in 2007, when we decided to move to electronic transaction, the Bank of Ghana issued a branch banking guideline. And that's 2007, branch banking guidelines. And we decided that even though this whole process was started in Kenya, East Africa, they decided to go telco-based, which means Safaricom, the telcos were the ones that were doing electronic transactions. Ghana decided to go bank-based, which means that no entity in this country can issue electronic transactions, including Momo, without partnering with a bank. So MTN as an entity is not licensed, and MTN is not the one that issues Momo. Most people don't know. MTN has a subsidiary called Mobile Money Limited. Mobile Money Limited is 100% licensed by Bank of Ghana and supervised by Bank of Ghana. They are in charge of Momo. MTN is telco. They provide telephone services. But Mobile Money Limited does mobile money. And so they are bank-based, licensed by us, partnered by bank. That created a platform for us to make sure that whatever mobile money or electronic money that has been issued is part of the credit or money supply captured in commercial banks, which is automatically part of our monetary aggregates. So it does not alter our monetary transmission mechanism in any way. It is already being measured and it is already being captured. If you go to Kenya, they have a problem because they do not have the data from the telcos as part of what happens in commercial banks. So it has altered their monetary transmission mechanism. But Ghana is not in the situation of Kenya. Every Momo you see, it does not come to your account if the float does not move to a commercial bank. That is behind the scenes, so you don't see. So once you press your phone, that money moves from the bank you are saving with to another commercial bank before the money hits your account. So every single electronic transaction is captured in the banking data and it's part of monetary transmission mechanism. So moving to ECB does not distort the monetary transmission mechanism at all. Ghana started with the right foundation. Now Kenya and the other Southern and Eastern African countries are now trying to come back to bank-based. But when people are free and they are enjoying so much, the telcos are fighting back. But we started with bank-based right from the beginning and set up the Ghana Interbank Payments and Settlement System, GATE, in 2007, which is 100% owned by Bank of Ghana, and moved all our common switch platform, RTGS, check code line truncation, all to GATE and controlled by the Bank of Ghana. So everything you see, interoperability, is sitting right in the banking system and is part of our monetary policy transmission mechanism. That's the difference between Ghana and the rest of the world. And only Ghana in Sub-Saharan Africa has full interoperability. No other country has full interoperability.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari. As we try and draw the curtains down, I will give you just quick 1 minute, as you try and wrap up your final thoughts. Sorry.
I should thank the Bentsi-Enchill family for supporting these lectures. And second, I want to also say that it's been so instructive, my sitting here. 2 points I want to make. The first is that, yes, we are a young society, maturing, of course, but I tell you, sometimes we behave as if we are so mature, and we talk. If we are not careful, we may damage an institution like the central bank without knowing the complexities that are contained in the institution. I say this because I see the central brain of governance as the executive, really. And it has two if you like, agencies. The central bank doesn't stand all by itself. And you talk fiscal. Fiscal is Ministry of Finance working the budget. It's also a sub-agency of the central brain, the executive. And so if we want to lay blames of efficient functioning of the economy, I believe the central figure to look for is the central executive authority, if you like, the government. And it should be the government using these sub-agencies, central bank, and the budgetary authority. It should be the central authority seeking to balance the operations of the two, so it gets the efficient running of the economy, and that should be through the overall economic policy. That's where development should issue from. If this central brain office gets imbalanced, then you get the problems we get. So, after all, the 17 times Ghana is said to have visited the IMF. Was it the central bank that went to the IMF, or was it the government? It was the government. So I think we have to continue to have lectures like these for the polity to get informed, to get insights, so then we can perhaps contribute. Because the sovereign authority really is the people. That's what the Ghana Constitution says. It's not Bank of Ghana, as somebody observed. Nobody knows Bank of Ghana is faceless. Yes, the deputy governor is here, but who voted for him? He hasn't visited all the constituencies to seek mandate to do the work he's doing. He was indirectly appointed by that central brain. Governor, deputy governors, and the entire institution, in a way, is there to support that central authority, which is the government. And budget, who works the budget? Minister of Finance? No. It's an executive presidency we are working. So the Minister of Finance it can be appointed and removed by that central authority easily. And it's how we get the two sub-agencies to work in balance, always following that central vision of running the economy through good governance. That I think we should seek solutions in this matter of economic development from. That's it. From the little experience I had from 2001 to 2008, 9 was January 9, so I don't want to count on that. I was fortunate to have gotten the governor of the central bank in the person of Paul Akwan. And I believe all these smart bankers worked to him and him to me. I tell you, practically every week, this man was on me. A small man but always carrying some bulky file under his armpits. I was almost getting fed up with him, especially when we had gone to meeting. This man would come every week to sit across the table in my office, and then in his very soft, almost piping voice, Mr. President, the way we are spending, we are not. See, this is how the monetary policy had impact on the fiscal policy. But it was all through the president. So they go and just keep on making me aware of how the balancing was being worked at. And through that cooperation, to the surprise of everybody, including the entire cabinet of my government, within a few years, this man came back telling me one day, Mr. President, I believe the city has recovered so well, we could do away with all the many zeros after the one. I nearly begged him to walk out of my office. I said, hey, please, we don't want trouble. How can you come and say, that time we needed something like 10,000 cedis for $1. There were 4 zeros after the one to get $1 of our city, 10,000 cedis. And the man came working one day after all the many weeks he virtually pestered me and tortured me with his reports. We can do away with all the zeros because the city has recovered, it's so strong. I said, no, please, we are not joking here. What do you mean we should cross out all the zeros? Mr. Governor, don't do that. So, Mr. President, I'm telling you the truth. Then I looked at him and I saw he was meaning business. So I said, well, I'm not too convinced. But please let me go and talk with my cabinet, and then you can come back in. So eventually, I got him and his team to come to cabinet meeting with all the ministers sitting there to convince us truly that Ghana cedi had recovered strength. We could even get $1 and some cents for 1 cedi. That was what happened. Talking of monetary policies impact on economic development. You balance the monetary policy against the fiscal policy, both coming under economic policy, overall economic policy of government. Not until we do that, we may miss the target and perhaps sacrifice the central bank for matters that perhaps we are all not too much aware of. And truly, when Polakwa and his team came to meet the cabinet, well, I was going to say he convinced us, but I tell you, even there, some ministers started asking that perhaps we should drop 2 zeros and leave 2 zeros. But Polakwa insisted and persisted that no, cedi had recovered. And that's how we achieved that thing. So economic policy should come through the overall economic policy, should come through the vision of government. And that's where the lady professor's thing comes in. Changing the structure of the economy. Look at Singapore. What does it happen? It comes through a vision born out of real grasp of what it takes to convince people. The trust. The deputy governor talked of Ghanaian citizens always going behind the scenes to hide their personal central banks under their mats and all that. If you don't have the trust, I tell you, human nature will not yield to laws. The black market will prevail. So how do we secure the trust of people? And that comes gradually but persistently through good governance that would earn the trust. And so this lecture, I think I should end up here. Fantastic insights I'm getting, and I'm very happy I managed to come. So congratulations to all of you.
A round of applause for the former President, John Agyeman-Duah. There is one expression that I always liked about the former president when he was the president, when he always says that, my government. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's do 1 minute round, and please, we shouldn't move away from you when we end the program. There's another room for networking and cocktail, please. So don't rush as soon as we end this program. Quickly, a minute, rounding up.
Well, I realize I've spoken for 40 minutes, and that is enough. So I would like to thank all of you for listening to what I had to say. Thank you very much.
Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour.
I think that President Kufuor has said it all. A strong coordination between fiscal policy and monetary policy is what is required. But that is on condition that you get a more agreeable president like him, where there is the link and that cordiality between the president and the governor. But if you get two opposing views, then I believe that laws should be made to work to check the excesses of the executive. And that is where, for example, the Fiscal Council could be given some legal backing so that the president is compelled to go with the advice. I know there are issues, we are revising, the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was suspended, it's brought back. We have to make laws so that the men and women in power abide by them, and then it's not just by means of cordiality between leaders, I believe.
Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, you have the final word and the final thought. Doc.
Thank you very much. I think former President Kufuor has summarized so nicely. I don't want to add anything. Thank you very much.
I know you were part of that team that is presentation.
Yes, every single meeting he talked about, I was in the room.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our panelists for this evening. You can take your seats now. Thank you so much for the Speaker, Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour, and also the First Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for them. Indeed, I would say that it was worth moving away from the legalese to talk about the economy and monetary policy. Another round of applause for our panelists. I'll now invite the chairman to give us his final thoughts. A round of applause for our chairman.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, invited guests. I cannot but mention the contribution that has been made by our former president, Mr. Kufuor. Am I more enlightened than I came? Yes and no. Am I confused? Maybe. So much to chew on, so much economic terms and expressions. And for the uninitiated, I think that if I were to delve into those issues, I may expose my ignorance. On that note, I want to thank attendees and the organizers of this memorial lecture, and to say that although all our questions have not been answered, whether or not at the next meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, interest rates will go up, the answer yes or no. Whether the take-home pay will take you actually home, the answer still yes or no. Will inflation come down? Yes or no. But what have I learned? I've just learned that economic policy is much more nuanced than we all know it. And there's an account proverb that says that if you don't go to the battlefront, when those who have lost come back, you say that they didn't fight. So, well, the fight is upon us, so let's fight it to the end. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Mr. Divine Lecture. Indeed, throwing out one breath, more answers, and another breath, more questions for us. And I know that it will still go on even after we leave here to our homes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite Nani Wusong Kumasaki to give us the vote of thanks. Round of applause for Nani.
Thank you, George. Most of us here in this room
like money, especially the lawyers here. But when we think about money, we usually think about it in two ways: making money and spending money. We never really pause to think about monetary policy, its history, how it's evolved, and how that evolution affects our lives today. So we are very grateful to the excellent speakers who have helped us this afternoon think about money in a different way. Our sincerest thanks to Mr. Ivor Agyeman-Duah for such an insightful lecture. Thank you for the insights shared, and thank you for your time with us today. We are also very grateful to our panelists, Dr. Maxwell Opoku-Afari, who everyone tried to give him a very difficult time today, and of course, Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Baffour, for your very stimulating discussions. Thank you, George, for excellently moderating the panel. We are similarly grateful to all our distinguished guests. Dr. Soa, thank you so much for the very interesting opening remarks. Our own DKD lecturer, thank you for chairing this event. We also want to extend our thanks to the Bentsi-Enchill family for the unwavering support and also for allowing us to keep KB's memory alive through these lecture series. It would be remiss of me if I don't acknowledge and extend our sincerest thanks to His Excellency former President J.A. Kufuor. So we are so grateful that you graced us with your presence, and even more that you contributed to the discussions and shared your insights with us. To everyone in this room, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next year at the next lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanya, for that wonderful vote of thanks. Indeed, we believe that the family and Kojo would be excited about what has happened here tonight. Thank you so much. And a round of applause for yourselves. You've been wonderful audience. Show some love to yourself. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, when we end the program, please don't rush. Networking is very critical. So thank you so much. My name is George. I've been your MC and your moderator. Have a good evening, and let's network. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I want us to do something. Let's celebrate this distinguished gentleman while he's alive. Standing ovation to our former president, John Adjekum Kufuor. Let's celebrate him while he's alive. Indeed, a former president once said,